thank you so much for everyone joining. Looks like I can take over. I'm going to introduce the rest of these amazing, good-looking people in just a second. But first, I want to start with a little bit of context. So you're all here to learn more about how Royal Farms connected 300 locations in 60 days. If you do the math, that is 5 locations a day. So pretty wild. Really excited to talk about how they did that, kind of share some of their secrets. And just some quick housekeeping. First off, we're going to send a recap. So if you ask in the notes, it will happen, no worries. Use the chat, as Sarah mentioned, if you have any questions or, of course, interact with the Q&A. And then we'll also have a few polls. So love to make this a two-way discussion. Please take the polls. All right. So what are we going to be covering today? First, we're going to talk about the Frontline success journey, which I'll introduce in just a few moments here. And then a few of the key questions we'll cover is, what does an effective communication strategy look like? How do you support managers and develop internal talent? And then how are you going to leverage data to make decisions? And as Sarah mentioned, we'll do a little bit of Q&A at the end. Awesome. So let's jump in. First, I'm going to start by talking about how we make frontline lives easier. So what you're going to hear today is a story that might seem familiar. Every organization is a little bit different, but essentially there's 4 main characters. All of them play a different role in leveraging engagement to drive business impact. So if you start from the top, Royal Farms, their initial need for Beekeeper came as a result of a compliance issue that was identified and needed to be addressed. However, as HR got involved, they saw a much larger opportunity to empower their workers and their managers. These are all people who don't sit behind a desk, and they're always on the go. These managers needed tools to better coach their teams, empower their workers, and then avoid doing administrative work so they could spend that time, that quality time, with their employees. When it comes to the workers, they also needed easy access to critical company information, resources, and comms. Now, the halo effect of all of this is, of course, a stronger culture where everyone feels included. But even when you look back at the top at those business leader metrics, if these 3 groups are all supported well, the HR team, the managers, the workers, you can expect a better impact on all those metrics: productivity, retention, safety, quality, and compliance. And that's kind of what we mean when we say making frontline lives easier. Now, of course, none of this happens overnight. It is very much a journey, and we like to call it the frontline success journey. The way I think of it is these are kind of the common paths that we've mapped out from working with 1,300 plus customers. So the first one, if you look at the bottom left, is connect. I like to think of this as the first step towards building that foundation, getting those workers access to the information and communications they need. Now is kind of where the magic happens, is the integrate piece of this. The true power really comes once you have everyone in the same platform and you have a captive audience. Now you can run other systems and programs through Beekeeper and make sure that you have a single point of access to drive higher adoption of your existing tech stack, all of the other tools you've already invested in. Additionally, you get to automate some of your HR work. So some of the manual processes, the paperwork that no one really wants to do, you can now take that online and automate it. That could be anything from onboarding to PTO requests, to succession planning, you name it, and you can find a way to turn that process and bring it online. Which kind of brings us to simplify. Once you start doing this, other teams will start to take notice. So your operations team, other folks will say, well, why can't we try doing this in Beekeeper as well? And the answer is you can, whether that's for automating maintenance requests, documenting important information, creating forms, all of that is possible. And it's simplified because, once again, it's not manual or paper-based. And it's also not super complex. I think when people hear workflows, they think you need an IT degree or like some specialized skill set. But the reality is this stuff can be done in just a few clicks, and with help from geniuses like Charlotte and her team, who make this kind of very easy and plug and play. And then finally, that fourth step is accelerate. This is kind of the cherry on top. Once again, once you have a captive audience and everyone on the same platform, you're now in an environment that is very data rich. And all of this employee engagement data can then be used to identify retention trends and also take action on behavior, on user behavior. So the example I always like to give is if you know an employee, for example, isn't engaging, you can trigger a stay interview so that you can proactively address that and avoid any sort of turnover. So as we go through this, I just encourage all of you to think about what your organization needs today and also tomorrow. So Q4 and into next year, whether you're at the beginning of this journey and just starting to connect your employees, or you're starting to think about maximizing what you already have and you're further along. And you can ask us where you fit in this journey because we'd love to show you what to look forward to next and also find ways to get best practices from our customer base. With that, I'll hand it over to our presenters for the day. We have Charlotte Buffington, Director of Customer Success at Beekeeper, Jessica Mentee, Director of Training, and then Brian Roche, Chief People Officer, both at Royal Farms.
Well, thank you so much, Sid, for the intro and for setting all of the context for today's discussion. So as Sid mentioned, Royal Farms is truly the perfect example of a customer that has embraced this idea of the frontline success journey, first really connecting and engaging with employees before weaving in additional capabilities that really simplify processes, as Sid had explained. So I'm really excited for all of you, the audience, to learn more about what Royal Farms has done. But first, Brian and Jessica, thank you so much for being with us today. Brian, can you kick us off by telling us a bit more about Royal Farms?
Yeah, absolutely, Charlotte. Thank you for having Jessica and I today. So, Rural Farms, we are a convenience store chain. We are a family-owned, third-generation convenience store company. We're based out of Baltimore, and we currently operate 300 stores in 7 states, soon to be expanding into our 8th. And we have over 6,500 employees, but that number is continuing to grow because we're in a growth mode and we're adding 20 to 25 stores a year. So we're going to add 500 to 1,000 more employees every year for the foreseeable future.
Wow, congratulations on that growth. That's really, really exciting. And what prompted you, Brian, to initially start looking for an employee engagement tool?
It all really started when we caught wind of some lawsuits that were being filed out there against one of our competitors. And that the lawsuit was specifically around the use of text messaging. And so we utilized some of our legal resources, and one of the key takeaways from those conversations was, and we were doing the same, quite frankly. We had stores that were texting employees on a regular basis, and in consultation with those legal people, they said, "Look, you need a system that's under company control." And so that was kind of the impetus that got this whole ball rolling on Beekeeper.
Yeah, that makes sense. And we hear that from a lot of customers that we work with, that texting is a very common tool used to communicate. So definitely makes sense. So Brian, I have to ask, what made you ultimately choose Beekeeper after all of your searches?
We went through the RFP process with many companies. We looked at internal systems that we had that had some of the capabilities that we thought we might be looking for. And at the time, our director of IT came to me and he said, "Look, I found this great system. It's called Beekeeper." He's like, "You guys got to look at it." And so we went through the whole process of RFPs with all the different companies. And one of the big selling points for me was the checklist that Beekeeper provided to us during that process. And we used that checklist even when we were looking at the other companies. And then we just kind of we compared all the check marks. We went down all the companies, compared all the check marks. And Beekeeper just had all the functionality that we were looking for, plus some that we weren't even looking for, that we didn't even know that we probably wanted. And one of the things that really helped us in making our decision was what Beekeeper calls their fair play rules. So that allowed us to make sure that every user signed off on kind of the rules around using the platform, and text messaging was obviously one of those big things. So at the end of the day, there was just so much more that Beekeeper offered us that the other companies didn't.
Right. And I remember when I asked you, when I met you back in May, what Beekeeper superpower was, and you said the fair play rules, which is not what I was expecting, but it does really speak to the power that that functionality has in compliance, and I mean everything that you were just speaking to. So, Brian, thank you for telling us about Royal Farms and about your journey to Beekeeper. So, Jessica, my first question is going to be to you. You and I have discussed in the past that a communication strategy for Beekeeper is really two parts. First, actual communication about rolling out Beekeeper to the front line, defining the impact, making sure people know that the tool is coming, right? And then the second piece is a strategy about what communication and content will actually be put in the platform once it's live. So can you first start by telling us about your rollout communication strategy?
Yeah, and when we hear you talk about Beekeeper as a communication tool, and that lower pillar that Sid was showing us, as far as Connect goes, right? We knew that as an organization that we were not communicating well. We were not connecting with our frontline workforce. I think prior to Beekeeper, we really had a lot of limited ways to reach all employees at all levels within the organization. Of course, we're using emails and Teams, but a lot of that communication really only gets to leadership. And I think we also knew that we were very lucky if the messaging got below that first line of leadership communication that was happening. The other thing that, we think about the problems we set out to solve is we had a lot of top-down communication that was happening and really no way to measure effectiveness. So when we talk about our rollout strategy, one of the early decisions that we did have to make was what our stream setup was going to look like, right? So how are we going to communicate through streams? We really wanted to make sure that we organized our content, but we didn't overwhelm. So while we had a lot of ideas as to how to organize our streams, our rollout team kind of came to the consensus of less is more. We can always add more in the future. We can add in additional layers, but right now our primary focus needs to be on solving those problems that we've set out to solve, right? It's just getting people comfortable with the platform and knowing that this is a way to connect and, receive and send information. So that was a big part of our training initiative, and the rollout kind of followed suit with that. So during training, we really only focused on three things. So it was get your team activated, and then streams and chats. So like my training team probably heard that out of me 1,000 times during the rollout. I was like, activation, streams, and chats, activation, streams, and chats. That's what we're here for right now. So we're about 6 months in, right? And I think we're ready to start layering in some of those additional Beekeeper capabilities, because once our teams have gotten comfortable with that, been able to master it, we're ready now to roll out additional development training. We actually have one in 2 weeks where we're going to introduce forms, surveys, and campaigns, right? And then we have one the following month on using analytics to make great decisions. And I know we're going to talk a little bit about that later, but that is really kind of the strategy behind our rollout.
Great. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I envision you, Jessica, having activation streams and chats on posters up in our really drive the message home. But no, that's great. That makes a lot of sense. And it really speaks to keeping it simple and keeping the message simple. The second we start to overcomplicate, at that point, people start to get maybe uninterested. So it's glad to hear you had your focus and you really stuck to that. And Jessica, what was your strategy once you rolled out, or I guess as you were preparing for rollout, for the actual communication and content in Beekeeper?
Yeah, so right now we actually have a team of 4 Beekeeper support team is what we call it, but it's 4 members of our HR department that are really focused on supporting the company sponsored streams that we have set up. And in a sense, our strategy has been to gatekeep kind of some of the communication through that Beekeeper support group, just to ensure that, we did it for a couple of reasons. One, we didn't want to have certain departments monopolizing the streams and just, they're posting 4 times a day or every single day and having some of that messaging get oversaturated. But we also wanted to be able to coach people and train people as they're submitting, like, hey, I want to post this on behalf of my department, and us be able to provide feedback of how we can make that post a little bit more effective. And then also follow up with the departments that, right? So we're managing that process. And so we know we haven't received something from IT, or we haven't received something from finance in the last couple of weeks, and just have a lot of high touch on what the big picture experience looks like for the end user. So one of the things that with that is, you guys can see it on the screen here, has been really helpful for us, is we created a content calendar for our corporate stream communication, as well as just kind of a next level down, our district streams that we do have, which are run by district leaders. And, we did this to really make sure that our teams understood the expectation of a steady flow of communication and content each week, but our teams, both on the back end and the end users, have come to expect, like, hey, I know that on Mondays, HR is going to post something, or I know that on Wednesdays, it's going to be food service. And that helps you kind of, to be directed to the platform for information that interests you, if you will. So that's been our approach in the first 6 months here, but I don't think it's our forever strategy to gatekeep all the information, but we certainly have a lot more work to do with our content creators, with just kind of getting that perfect post and the most effective content out there.
Great. And this content calendar, I cannot emphasize enough, as I'm sure you understand, Jessica, it's so critical to the adoption of the platform. When people know that there will be certain content shared, to your point, they come back and check. It also creates those habits that you want from employees of, I know I can come in on Wednesday to access HR specific information or whatever it might be. So really drives that adoption, really creates good habits around the content you're sharing. With anything though, Jessica, I'm sure there have been plenty of learnings. Anything new, right? Can you share some of your learnings?
Always look back on all training initiatives, like if I could do it again, right? So part of our initial training plan was to get those district streams set up with specific content that had kind of been planted ahead of time before we started activating our frontline users. And that came because the district leaders and our store leaders were trained first before we started, turning on those activations for others. And the idea was that they would be given a directive to add specific content to their streams that when we did roll out to the masses, the training kind of connected with that, where it would say, go find this post and tell us what the second emoji is, or go comment on this post, right? Like that can't be part of the training if those things don't exist. So we trained our district and store leaders first, and they went through what we called the Art of the Perfect Post training, where we really talked about, the different components of great and effective posts. And as we went through that, we also created some templates for them to use. So we said, here's your directive. You need to create 3 posts. You need a welcome message, you need to put a poll on there, and you need to do a getting to know you post. And we created a template for each of those 3 posts and said, if you're feeling, if like your creativity's run a little bit dry, you can use the template. Just make sure you customize it with your name and that you, put your own spin on it. But, just to kind of dip your toe in the water a little bit before saying, all right, take everything you learned and go just do it. And with my control issues, I thought that was a great backup plan for people that maybe were slower to pick up on what we were putting down. It did backfire a little bit. And I think it did so because we had people who copy and pasted our templates and forgot to customize it. So it literally said, getting to know you, your name here, right? Or they copy and pasted it. And then the way it came over, the formatting was all wonky once it got put into Beekeeper. And it wasn't as organic as I wanted it to be. But I think the big lesson learned is we would have probably been more effective in having those leaders and challenging them to create the post originally on their own. And then maybe we talk about this gatekeeping, people on our Beekeeper support team be the follow-up. Okay, I'm going to check off on it, or hey, I want to provide you this feedback before we go live. So that was definitely a lesson learned. And I need to let go of your control issues.
Is the main takeaway. No, thank you so much for sharing. I know it was well intentioned, right? But there's this fine balance between making things really easy and maybe a little too easy, that we take some of the opportunity for people to be creative or whatever it might be out of it. But again, the idea was totally there to make it easy for everyone. So that's a really good lesson learned. Thank you, Jessica. Brian, I'm going to pick on you really quickly. Has anything related to the communication been particularly eye-opening for you?
Yeah, for me, I really kind of had the aha moment within days of when we went live. And I specifically remember it was a post that Jessica's team made, and we would call them mini clips, where her team would post little small short training videos. And for some reason, I was just there looking at comments. And one of the first comments I saw of that mini clip was, "Wow, this is great information." And that just did it all for me. Like within a couple of days, we've got an employee at the store that we were never communicating with before was going, "Wow, I love this information. Give us more." And you can see some of the comments on here that we've got up on the screen. These are all the different levels within our stores. So a customer service associate, that's an entry level position. That's somebody that we never communicated directly with before. And our goal was to get those communications down beyond our store leaders to the lowest levels, or the entry level employees in the company. And there's various different things here. We changed our vacation policy, and that's what the first one is there. That's an entry level management person, like, yeah, this is great. And we just continue to see, even today, all these different types of comments of, "This is great, give me more. Wow, I love this." Or in the one example, we introduced a new soup. We always ask our employees to go and try it. Tell us what you think about it. This is how we can get that feedback now. We don't have to be sending emails and doing surveys. They're telling us without us even asking. So it's just really an eye opener when you start seeing the feedback and the results from the employees in the comments that they're making.
Yeah, for sure. That's really inspiring. Thank you for sharing. And maybe your new superhero answer, Brian, might be the comments over the Fair Play mentioned too. No, this is really great just to see that engagement that you didn't even know existed, or giving the employees the new opportunity to engage in that way is really neat. So now, Brian, that you're seeing such strong engagement, what are you going to try next beyond connection, beyond engagement?
Yeah, now, it's about what else can we use it for? What other things that we're doing in the company can we use Beekeeper for? And, I was thinking this morning, it's like, I sit in meetings and somebody will say something, it's like, "Ooh, that's a great thing to post on Beekeeper." Or if I'm just talking to somebody and they ask me questions, like, "Well, did you post that on Beekeeper? Did you make our teams aware of that?" So, from food service innovation to marketing, loss prevention, safety, it's about getting those departments to really get engaged and using Beekeeper as one of the tools in their toolbox to help do our rollouts and to spread information and to make sure every single one of our 6,500 employees are getting that information. And so we're also looking at what we can do as far as additional communication, or things that they've gotten one way before, they can get now in one platform. So, for example, our benefits guide or our employee handbook, or we have a program called Working Advantage that gives our employees, certain things where they can get discounted theme park tickets or airline tickets or things like that, or even our on-demand pay platform. We've created all links to all of those systems now in Beekeeper, so they don't have to log into each of those platforms separately. It's kind of a one-stop shop. Hey, you want this? Go on to Beekeeper, click on the link, and it takes you right there. So those are the kind of the things we're continuing to build. We started with some, and every week, every month, we're always thinking of new things that we think we might be able to use Beekeeper for. Jessica, do you have anything else you want to add there?
Yeah, I mean, you really took the words out of my mouth. With Beekeeper is another tool in our toolbox. And, when you think about training initiatives, training isn't just about teaching somebody something new, but it's communication at this, on the same side too. And, the departments that might have announcements, it might not be something new that we're teaching somebody, but it's about communicating change. And, we really saw the power of that as we worked to roll out a new labor system, which is a company-wide huge initiative that we embarked upon this year, right after our Beekeeper rollout. And we made sure to use Beekeeper as kind of that method in which we delivered the information of changes coming. What do you need to know about change? We did, micro messages, right? Over the course of 6 weeks, the posting content was different, or it would build off of what we talked about last week. And you can see through some of the comments, people are like, I'm so excited about this change. This is going to be great. And that's part of change management 101. Right? Being able to get people excited about change. And we were able to do that through kind of what we call this Beekeeper series or initiative that we did. And we have another change coming down the pipe this month, not as big as a new labor model system, but I'm already thinking of, this isn't just one Beekeeper post, this is 4 over the course of this time frame, which will help us be more successful in executing once the change actually happens. So that's going to be, it's a huge tool. When I think of Beekeeper, I am like, this is a training tool.
Oh, that's great, Brian and Jessica. Thank you for sharing. And it sounds like there are a lot of exciting things to come farms and a lot of programs and initiatives to roll out. And it's really cool to hear that you're using Beekeeper to do that. And really, that's something that we hear from customers all the time, that they utilize Beekeeper to launch other technology, other programs. Jessica, like you just mentioned, this added layer of communication that Beekeeper provides can be so critical to change management 101, as you call it, but to the adoption of other platforms that might have lower usage, especially without that communication. In fact, a recent report from Gartner showed that only 22% of employees actually use some major HRIS systems in their day-to-day, like a payroll system, for example. So that communication is really critical to driving that adoption. So I'd love to just run a quick poll and hear from all of you about which tools and programs at your company you would like to see better adoption from. And there are some options in the poll, but would also love to hear from you in the comments if you have any other ideas or thoughts not included in this poll. Go ahead and vote. Some responses coming in. Good. All right. Thank you for responding. We'll definitely take a look at those. Can we see any of those responses? Said to see them on your end. All right, that's okay. We can send out a chat. All right, great. Perfect. Well, Brian, I have a next question for you. We know that developing internal talent is especially critical at all companies, but really rural farms, and it's a big focus for your business. So can you tell us how Rural Farms uses Beekeeper to develop internal talent?
Yeah, absolutely. And we probably fall into that category of 32%, of employees going into our HRIS system. And that was one of the problems we were having with communication. We would post stuff on there and only a third of the people would see it. But I think as most companies do, we do succession planning. And we're always trying to identify who those people are that can move up in the company. We want everybody to have a promote from within mentality, whether it's a senior executive promoting within his department or whether it's a store leader promoting from within in their store. And we identified really quick that we could use Beekeeper to help us identify who some of those employees were that may not be speaking up and saying, hey, I want to be promoted. Or that the store leader might not have identified as a possible promoted person or promotable person. So we developed this simple form. It took less than 5 minutes probably. And that was with us being new and not really knowing how to do it. We did it in less than 5 minutes, I think. But it's a form that's available on the homepage. It's a quick link. And anybody that is interested in any level of promotion, either into entry-level management or into senior roles, can submit that form. It comes to a Beekeeper mailbox that we have set up, that only the team that Jessica mentioned earlier, that team of 4, are the ones that are kind of looking at those emails. And to date, we've had over 130 people submit interest in promotions at various different levels. So for us, that was a huge win, because that's 130 people we didn't know before that potentially could be promoted and wanted to be promoted. So that's just another win.
And it's so neat to have the ability as an employee to say, hey, I'm someone that also wants to grow with the company and I want growth opportunities, and to continue and to learn. So that's really neat that Royal Farms has set that up. And Jessica, how else are you planning to use Beekeeper in addition to this program for improving talent development?
Yeah, so Royal Farms was actually recently certified as a registered apprenticeship sponsor in the state of Maryland, which is a really exciting opportunity. And we just launched this program. We got certified last year. We've been piloting for the last year, and we're doing a larger scale launch that actually started last week. So we announced it to kind of 2 of our 4 zones, and we got our store leaders excited about it. And we told them, go back to your stores and I'd start to identify talent, start talking about this program with people, and then direct them to the Beekeeper form to let us know if they're interested in apprenticeship. So we actually took that form that Brian was talking about, the internal promotions form, and just added some questions. So we were able to add to it, right? One of the, here we attached the flyer with the document and the information about apprenticeship right into the form. So while they're filling out the form, they can read about apprenticeship, and then they can say, add the question, are you interested? Do you live in Maryland? So we have that additional information that's in there that it gets sent to us, and we can then kind of create that steady flow of candidates for apprenticeship, both internally and externally, to help make that program successful. So yeah.
Yeah, really neat. That sounds like a really cool program. And also neat to hear how you're adjusting, kind of speaks again to that Frontline journey. You can always adjust and make changes as things change, as you bring in more programs. So it's really cool to hear how you were doing that.
And I'll just add, I did forget to mention, when we did a post last Friday morning about apprenticeship, and that was kind of, even though we did a formal introduction to it at a big meeting the day before, that was people who weren't at the meeting, just saw the post, and we said, linked right to the form, here it is, apply here if you're interested. Within 10 minutes of that being posted, we had already received applications.
Wow. Great. Yeah. I mean, in the past, it would have had to be word of mouth or in a meeting.
Yeah.
Didn't necessarily have that, maybe a bulletin board, but that digital option to also get it to many people at once, like you have through the stream. Great. Thank you for sharing. Before we jump into the next question, just revisiting that poll, looks like about 60% of you said you'd love to see higher adoption of, I think I saw HRIS systems at the top, about 60%. So that's really, really good to know. And hopefully you're getting some good tips on how you could communicate more about those systems to drive adoption. Change management 101 using a tool like Beekeeper. Wonderful. Oh, thanks for sharing those poll results. Great. All right, so on to our last question for today. So Jessica, I know in your role, it's important to make data-informed decisions. When you think about training and developing employees, it's important to use data to know what your content should be for those trainings and how you should change the content, right? So how have you done so using Beekeeper? Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Definitely through forms. So we've been using Beekeeper forms to collect data a couple different ways, though. Most recently, we had that huge system rollout for our new labor system that really affected the whole company, but we started, of course, training our store leaders. And after all of those training events, we were able to real-time collect reaction and understanding data from the store leaders after the training. And we were able to very quickly, using the reporting tool, turn that information back around to the district leaders and be able to say, like, hey, of the 25 people who attended this class, 13 of them are not confident in this area, or 60% of your team says that they're ready for launch when 40% says they need more support. And So we were able to provide that data to them. And then also, as my team was analyzing that information, we are able to provide customized recommendations based off of the data of, hey, I think you need to follow up in this way, or, maybe this small group needs follow up, and provide them some customized recommendations for what those best next steps are from a strategy standpoint in terms of making that rollout, really effectively. Similarly, so that was more also about kind of understanding of the material itself, but we also use this for all of our classroom training that we do, where at the end of class, the students will scan a QR code that's in the back of their kind of learning journal, if you will. And we say, give us some feedback on today's class. And the questions are anywhere from, was the content organized well enough? Did you have enough, room to write notes? To how was the instructor? Did the instructor ask the right questions or engage in conversation? So I'm getting feedback about the content that then my instructional designer is looking at that saying, okay, I've gotten a lot of feedback recently around how there wasn't enough room to write notes on this particular guide. But I'm also looking at it from a coaching perspective for my instructors. And I might say, you've had a lot of classes recently where people have commented that your energy is really low. And what can we do about, what support can I provide or additional training that we can work on increasing that, right? So it's a little bit of a performance management tool in that sense as well for me and my team. But it has been, I feel like every day I'm finding new ways to collect data and use metrics using Beekeeper.
No, that's great. So, I mean, an easier way to collect feedback and then implement it really quickly is what I'm hearing, Jessica. But also a coaching experience, a training opportunity for your trainers when they get that coaching feedback. So that's great. Brian, I know you're super keen on the analytics in the Beekeeper dashboard. So Jessica spoke about how she used insights from those forms to make decisions. But you're really looking at the analytics in the dashboard. How have those analytics been useful for you, Brian?
Yeah, the analytics are actually another one of the main selling points for us for the system, because we are a very data-driven company. Our owner is always like, show me the data. Prove it to me with data. Don't just tell me something, but prove it to me. And so I love the fact that I can go in, and I do go in 2 or 3 times a week, if not more, and look at the analytics, and specifically not just activations, but what's the engagement level? It's great if we can get 75, 80% activations, but if half of those people aren't engaged on a regular basis, then we're not being successful. And so I use that data. Sometimes it's a little friendly competition. If I see a district or a zone that may be below where we want them to be, hey, let's create a little competition. What do we need to do to get those numbers better, to get those people engaged? Because they're missing out on a golden opportunity if they're not communicating with those people. So just to share a quick example, we had a meeting with a group of over 100 store leaders last week, and one of the districts isn't doing as good as we would like. So a little friendly competition, guys. Here's the goal. Here's what the top district is doing. Why aren't you guys here? I checked yesterday. That district that's struggling is now on the uptick. Their engagement is increasing, their activations are increasing, which just benefits everybody because now more people are getting that information. So we're huge fans of the analytics.
Yeah. Who doesn't like a little competition? That makes it fun and usually drives the results that you're hoping to see too. And Brian, have any of the analytics been particularly surprising to you?
Yeah, the big one was the reason we put the system in, and that was the group chats. We got data last week that since inception, we have sent or received 1.3 million group chats. And
Wow.
to me, that's 1.3 million potential risk points that we've eliminated. If we had been using WhatsApp or Apple Chats or whatever it is, we've taken a lot of that mitigated risk and we've removed it.
Yeah. Wow. That's really a full circle. I mean, happy to hear that the reason why you bought Beekeeper, you're really seeing that return just based on the compliance piece alone. That's huge. Great. Well, this is hard for me to summarize. Just 3 takeaways because there have been so many valuable insights shared by Brian and Jessica. So thank you both so much. But if I can, firstly, It's critical to the success of launching Beekeeper, but honestly, any technology, any change, to have a rollout communication strategy, but also a strategy for the communication itself. Both are key to high adoption, so don't skip on your communication and content planning. Second, no doubt you have some incredible employees at your organizations that are looking for opportunities and want to grow with your business. So create programs like Rural Farms has for those hand raisers to say, I want that opportunity. And when they do, like Jessica mentioned, put the right steps in place, like the apprenticeship program, to really nurture their growth. And who knows, maybe some of these individuals can become leaders of your company one day. And lastly, the data in Beekeeper, and find in Beekeeper, and also the inputs that you receive from, say, forms or polls or surveys in the application can really help you make impactful decisions about your business or about processes you have in place, like Jessica mentioned with training. So pay attention to those metrics, really understand trends. Don't just look at the numbers, as Brian mentioned, really look at the trends and the impact overall, and then create opportunities for employee feedback as well, where they can say, hey, here's what we want to see more of, and see how that impacts your metrics in the end. So that's all we have for the webinar piece, or the Q&A piece. Now, what did we hear from the audience, Sid? What questions came in?
Yes. So I'd like to start with the first one. I think this will be interesting for a lot of folks. What was your implementation team like, and who was involved in the rollout process?
Yeah, we try to involve as many groups within the organization as we could. So my suggestion or advice to anybody thinking about implementing it: don't just have IT implemented, or don't just have HR implemented, depending on which department is in charge of it. We involved finance, we involved our store teams. They're the most important. They were the end users, so we wanted to make sure we had representation at that level, of what, as we were setting it up, what works, what doesn't. So HR, IT, operations, and then we had finance people. We had people from our support center that were all part in at some level with the implementation.
Absolutely. Here's another good line. How do you prevent negative feedback going out to the team that can impact morale?
Well, a nice thing with Beekeeper is, there's the ability for people to report a post or to report a comment. And so when that happens, we get notified, through the system, and then we can go in and decide and address that comment if we feel it's necessary, and potentially even remove it if it's discriminatory or something else that we deem as inappropriate.
The other piece that I would just add to that is when you are posting things on streams, you do have the ability to disable commenting. So there have been a few things that we've posted that we knew might be a little controversial or could have some extreme reactions, and we just ahead of time disabled commenting. You also can do that after the fact. And we've moderated certain chats, and it removes the posts. It tells the user. I've had somebody reach out to me and say, can you tell me more about why? And I was able to respond to them and provide them additional information as to why we removed their commentary. So I think it's also just ongoing coaching as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And some of those moderation features are available. So that's a great question. And yeah, another one that just came in. Did your implementation strategy look different across locations or even on an ongoing basis? What are some of the nuances?
No, I wouldn't say it was different across locations, but we did our implementation in kind of a stair-step method. So we started out with just 4 stores. And then we took the learnings from those 4 and rolled it out to the 4 districts that those 4 stores were in. We then took the learnings from that rollout and then rolled it out to the whole company. So we rolled it out to each store the same way per se, but we did it in kind of that stair-step model to make sure we were learning and adjusting before we went full company rollout.
Yep. Another question coming in is, have you seen higher adoption of some of the other programs you were showing earlier? I think Jessica, and Brian, you spoke to this as well. There's benefits programs, a handbook. Have you seen higher adoption right out of the gate?
I can speak to one of them, of Working Advantage, our employee benefit program. We saw a huge uptick in people using that and using that benefit, whether it was, like I said, for tickets to Hershey Park, or whether it was airfare tickets. Some of the other things are a little harder to measure as far as like our handbook and our benefits guide. We can see in the data how many people have done it. We know that a lot of people have viewed it, but we don't have a comparison point to what it was before.
Sure. Let's do one more unless we have others coming in. Okay, this is a good one. What compelled you to go to an outside vendor versus using internal resources to develop something?
Yeah, and that's what I mentioned earlier. We looked at internal systems that we were already using. We looked at our timekeeping system because they had functionality that could have done some of what we were looking for. We looked at our HR system because they had the same, they had some of the functionality, but Beekeeper just overwhelmed us with the not just what we needed now, but what we could potentially do in the future. And we are a company that we want to keep we want as few systems as possible, right? We don't want 20 different systems out there all having to communicate. So that was a huge piece of the puzzle for us, was finding that right system. And the two internal systems just didn't have what we wanted.
See if we have one or two more coming in. Here's a good one. What are you looking forward to doing next in Beekeeper? Sounds like it's early days still.
Jessica, I'll let you take one. I've taken three. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I think like one of the things that we are exploring right now is the workflow setup, and as well as some of the advanced workflow setup. I know that you said, but I don't have a degree in IT, right? It really is not difficult, but I think it's about identifying what are going to be the best use cases for your organization, to eliminate different systems, to put everything all in one place when possible. So that's kind of going to be our next step, where we've also been piloting because we have not moved the full company over, right? But we do this thing called Royal Kudos. It's essentially being able to say thank you or provide public recognition to people. Right now that lives in our LMS, and we have moved it to Beekeeper, and we've been monitoring, are we seeing an increase in users on Beekeeper? Are we seeing an increase on the amount of kudos that are being provided, up, down, and all around, right? Our supervisors giving it to direct reports and vice versa. Is there peer-to-peer recognition happening? So we're looking at a lot of the different data points with that, and we'll see if that move officially happens.
Very cool. Sounds like an exciting future. All right. Well, if there's no more questions, I think it's a good moment for us to wrap. Thank you all so much. I think there's tons of insights in here. And really, I'd like to just cap off by saying, first off, how can we help? If anything that you heard today was interesting, like I mentioned earlier, if you want to hear more about where you're at in this success journey, we'd love to help you kind of evaluate and think through what's next for you. We also have a very exciting webinar coming up about 7 ways to become an employer of choice. So look forward to that. We'll send a link in the recap. And just so you're aware, Royal Farms, of course, is in good company. We're at Beekeeper, we're trusted by over 1,300 customers. We've been in this specific space supporting frontline workers for over 11 years. So if you have any questions, please reach out. And I believe I want to give a quick thank you for everyone who came here, but I believe I need to turn it back over to Sarah here to say some closing thoughts.
Yes, thank you so much, Sid, and thank you to Charlotte, Jessica, and Brian for this really enlightening presentation today. And as Sid said, really important insights. And in closing here, I will just reiterate that you can watch their future webinar, and Sid will follow up with you on that. And now just a reminder to our HCI audience that today's webcast has been approved for HRCI and SHRM credit, as well as for HCI recertification. Your credits for attending this webcast will soon show up in your My HCI profile under the transcript tab. And while you're there, don't forget to check out hci.org for even more insights, as well as information on our certifications, virtual conferences, premium membership, and more. And I'd like to say one more thank you to our presenters today and to the good people at Beekeeper and Royal Farms. And I'd also like to thank you, our webcast viewer. Thanks for spending an hour with us, and we'll see you next time.